LAB. With me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive Training Camp Confidential Week in Review. I, of course, am your host, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Training camp for the Washington Commanders got underway on July 24th, this past Wednesday. The team practiced for 3 consecutive days. Number of things transpired during their first 3 days of training camp. We'll discuss the biggest storylines to come out of the first 3 days of training camp, as the team is now on an off day today and resumes training camp on Sunday. So, with that said, before we get to the 3 biggest storylines from the first week, the first 3 days of training camp, let's first talk about some honorable mention storylines. 1, how about John Ridgeway dropping 20 pounds to get into tremendous shape to give himself the best opportunity to crack this 53-man roster? Now, most of us believe that this team is only going to keep 4 defensive tackles. 3 of those spots are already spoken for in Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, and rookie second-round pick Johnny Newton. If you are to believe that 4 is the magic number at defensive tackle, then there is only 1 spot remaining. Washington has 2 guys vying for that 1 spot. If, again, you are going with the same premise that I am, that 4 is the number. It could be 5, and they could keep all 5. And I've said this about the roster already. We're in a position where the roster isn't good enough that if there's a player that you like at a position, and traditionally you wouldn't keep as many, you are in a position to keep more than you normally would because the talent isn't as rich throughout the roster. So you don't have to trim off fat necessarily and keep it tight at specific positions with certain numbers. Now, again, that's subject to change. May not feel that way now. You get to the end of training camp, you get the end of the preseason, and you start trimming off numbers, from the roster, and you start to try to tighten this thing up and you start to have some tough decisions. Maybe defensive tackle is only worth keeping 4. With that said, Phidarian Mathis, going into the 3rd year of his career, hasn't done much in the first 2 seasons. Former second-round pick out of Alabama, fully capable of not only making this roster, but carving out a niche for himself. If he can stay healthy, he's a guy that seems to have a shot. Same can be said for John Ridgeway, losing 20 pounds, getting into tremendous shape. I remember seeing the first photo of him and Daron Payne coming back from the little hiatus, if you will, and showing up when the veterans reported on the 23rd of July, and seeing a photo of him and Daron and thinking to myself, oh my God, John Ridgeway is in tremendous shape. Then seeing him out on the practice field and him move around, I think he is in a great spot to make this football team. Keep in mind, he does have a working relationship with head coach Dan Quinn. Ridgeway was drafted by the Cowboys originally in the 5th round out of Arkansas 3 years ago. So there is a working relationship between the two. And so we'll see what happens, and if the weight shed leads to John Ridgeway ultimately cracking this 53-man roster. Also, rookie 5th round pick Jordan McGee at the linebacker position is flying around the field and turning heads. It's another honorable mention from the first 3 days of training camp. He's been impressive all off season long since he was selected. People have been raving about him in the OTAs, in the mini camps, and it is translated into training camp with a lot of the media members, some of the players, the coaching staff talking about how he's a sponge, how he conducts himself like a veteran, not a rookie, how fast and explosive and dynamic he can be, and how he's been that way throughout the first 3 days of training camp. I've said this already, that this is a guy that is in line to take over for Bobby Wagner whenever he decides to pass that baton, whether it's next year, 2 years from now, whatever the case may be. McGee seems to be the next in line at the linebacker position. And if there's one position that I am super confident in, our general manager, Adam Peters' ability to select in day number 3 of the draft. And later, it's linebacker. We saw him do it in San Francisco. He was magnificent in finding late round gems at linebacker. I think we may have another one here in Jordan McGee. Off to a tremendous start. That is for certain. So, with that said, let's jump into our 3 biggest storylines from the first 3 days of training camp. So, you start with number 3. Emanuel Forbes gaining 17 pounds over the offseason. So much was made of Emanuel Forbes' height, size, weight, all of that good stuff in a photograph that was taken with him posing with a high school student. And that high school student looked 10 times bigger than Forbes. And people were going crazy on social media. The photo damn near went viral. And he looked so tiny, right? One of the things that head coach Dan Quinn mentioned prior to day 3 of training camp in his press conference was that they challenged Emanuel Forbes when they got here to put on weight, to show that he was serious about being the type of player that he was drafted to be in the first round of the 2023 NFL draft. And one of those ways he could show that he was serious was by putting on 15 to 20 pounds. Forbes took on the challenge, accepted it, and met that challenge, hit that mile marker by gaining 17 pounds. On the team website, he is listed as a 180-pound corner. And if that is in fact true, if he is up to 180 pounds, our second round pick cornerback, Mike Sainristil, is 182 pounds. So Forbes is right in that neighborhood. Granted, Sainristil 2 or 3 inches shorter, and proportionately, you look at Forbes and it just doesn't look like it's proportioned all that well in terms of his weight. The distribution looks uneven. He doesn't look like he weighs 180 pounds. But if that is in fact the case, if he's gained the weight that head coach Dan Quinn said that he gained, that's a massive storyline. We want to see if it's going to translate to him being a more physical football player, something that he lacked last season. He was tossed around by bigger receivers. He did not tackle well. These were things that were very evident watching him play a season ago. The added weight will definitely give him an edge on the field if that weight is legitimate and he can keep it on. It's one thing, it's one thing to add the weight. Can he keep it on and make it a part of who he is moving forward? We will see. But that is a storyline, and it was crazy because Quinn kind of mentioned it matter of fact, towards the end of his day 3 presser of camp, and we're like, wait. And Nikki Javala came back like, wait. So are you saying Emanuel Forbes gained 15 pounds? And Dan Quinn was like, yeah, he gained 15 pounds or so. And Forbes corrected him and said it was 17. And Quinn, to his credit, said 15 to 18 when he initially said it, and the number is actually 17. So that's a massive storyline. If Emanuel Forbes has gained 17 pounds, that is a step in the right direction. Doesn't mean he's going to be a better football player. Doesn't even mean he's going to be more physical. But that is a step that needed to be taken to get to a more physical standpoint and position for him moving into the upcoming season. Storyline, the biggest storyline, number 2 from this past week. Jayden Daniels comes out red hot throwing the football, albeit in a lot of red zone type of situations, some 2-minute, end of half situations, but still, you much rather him come out shredding it than the alternative, right? He came out, looked the part, kind of picked up where he left off in the mini camps, and he looks the part right now. And that's important because this team is only going to go as far this upcoming season and really into the future as far as Jayden Daniels is going to take them. He can bottleneck this team. If he does not play well in his rookie season, this team, from a record standpoint, will not perform well. If he comes out and he has a ridiculous rookie campaign, not necessarily will the team's record reflect that, but you have a much greater chance of the team's record reflecting that if it were to take place than the alternative of him not playing well. So, every time he comes out on the field and plays well and has a great practice and stacks that on top of another good performance, the confidence begins to swell. And as he gets into these joint practices later on in training camp and into the preseason, you're hoping to see a confident quarterback understanding the offense, understanding what's being asked of him, and going out and executing and giving this team the best opportunity to win and perform at a high level in 2024. And so Jayden Daniels has come out. He's gained the trust of the staff as he continues to zero in on being named the starting quarterback here. There is a competition that is taking place, but we all know, and as our head coach Dan Quinn has said multiple times, there is a process that they are going to adhere to. They feel good about it. They're on schedule. Everything's happening the way that it's supposed to. And ultimately, we know what the goal is, right? It's not a secret, as he mentioned after day one of training camp. It's not a secret what's going on here. And we know what's going on and what they're trying to ultimately have happen, but they have to go through the process and the steps of allowing that to take place. And so far, so good. Jayden Daniels came out. It was very sharp. Did throw an interception in day 3, but that's going to happen. And there will be more interceptions and there will be some bad days. But there were no bad days in the first 3 for Jayden Daniels. He comes out hot, and we're hoping that continues throughout the summer. The biggest storyline of the first 3 days of training camp was, without a doubt, Johnny Newton, Washington's second-round selection, the first of 3 out of Illinois, their defensive tackle, activated off of the non-football injury list to start camp. That was a sight for sore eyes. It was welcome news that we were not expecting. The day before training camp got underway, we heard from GM Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn. And Adam Peters talked about Newton's recovery process and how he was an animal and how they had to back him off a bit because of how aggressively he was attacking his rehab after having foot surgery on the opposite foot that he had surgery on post-regular season. In his final year at Illinois, he had surgery on his foot, which caused him to miss all of the post-season draft lead-up activities, which I think is part of the reason he fell to the second round, which is our gain. Everyone else's loss. But in drafting him, they quickly found out he had to have surgery on the opposite foot. So a lot of people were a bit down by that news, a little bit of a damper on what is an exciting draft pick, to say the least. But Washington was very hopeful he'd be ready for the start of training camp, but they didn't really want to press it, and they didn't think he would be, and that was okay. The timetable that we all had set was sometime in early August. Well, we got some of the best news we could have bargained for the day of training camp, the first day of training camp, Wednesday, July 24th, when head coach Dan Quinn approached the media during his presser prior to practice for day 1 of training camp and said that Johnny Newton was being activated off of NFI and would participate in practice. And so that was tremendous news that none of us were expecting. And he's been out there practicing all week. They're going to ramp him up. And the good thing is they're using this period to have him participate in individual drills and get him ready for the start of training camp when the pads go on, to get him out there with the team drills. So this is a really good period for him because a lot of what they're doing is a continuation of the offseason. So it's kind of getting him up to speed anyhow. He's getting his feet under him, getting his wind under him which will allow him to then perform when the pads go on and be a part of practice wholly and not just on an individual basis. So this was tremendous news that we weren't expecting, and he looks good. He looks the part. Seeing him out there on the field, running around, participating in those individual drills. So that was the biggest storyline by far and away in the first 3 days of training camp. What says you? Was there a storyline bigger than Johnny Newton coming off of NFI the first day of training camp? Were the 3 storylines that I gave you your big 3 from the start of training camp, or were there any others? Leave it down in the comment section. Love to hear your responses there. Pads go on Monday. Team comes back onto the practice field on Sunday. We'll be back talking about day 4 of training camp. That'll be the first day that the fans are allowed in to the practice facility to watch practice. So there'll be an extra bit of juice, a little bit more energy and buzz. We'll have more people talking about this player and that player because they got to lay eyes on guys. So it'll be interesting to hear from a lot of you who will be in attendance at training camp day number 4 as the pads go on for day 5. And that's when the real action gets underway, and that should be a ton of fun. But that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this installment of Training Camp Confidential, a week in review, giving you the 3 biggest storylines from the first 3 days of camp. Look forward to chopping it up with you on Sunday when we get back to business, day 4 of Training Camp Confidential with the Washington Commanders. We'll be live chopping it up, talking about what was said after and before practice, and also what went down on the practice field, as the fans will be in attendance for the first time during the 2024 training camp period for the Washington Commanders. Until then, I'm your man Louie T, signing off. You guys have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care. See you next time.